This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about the perfect revenge. When trust is shattered, one man turns his heartbreak into the ultimate public takedown. If someone had told me years ago that I'd end up here, pouring out my story like it's some cheap soap opera, I would have laughed them off. Drama was never my thing. I wasn't the type to get tangled up in messy situations. I thought I had my life figured out, everything under control. But life has a way of knocking you down just when you think you're standing strong. Let me start from the beginning. I'm not usually the type to wallow in self-pity, but what I'm about to share is my reality, no soft edges, no skipping over the painful parts. You deserve to hear the whole truth. And who knows? Maybe someone out there will learn something from this. If not, at least I'm getting this off my chest. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. My family wasn't rich, but we got by. My dad worked as an electrician, long hours, and my mom stayed at home, holding everything together. They were old-fashioned, fight as much as you want, but you never give up on each other. Divorce wasn't even a consideration for them. Naturally, I grew up thinking marriage was forever. Once you signed the papers, that was it. You stayed loyal and worked through the tough times. That belief set me up for heartbreak later on. I think that's where my twisted sense of commitment came from. Growing up with parents who stuck together no matter what made me expect too much from myself and from the people around me. I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could fix any relationship. My first marriage? I thought I could save that too. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. My first wife and I were young, probably way too young. We rushed into everything, marriage, buying a house, even talking about kids, all without a second thought. But when reality hit, financial problems, and her realizing we didn't fit together anymore, it all fell apart. That's when I first learned what real betrayal felt like. She left me for someone else, someone who, I guess, seemed more exciting than I was. And there I was, left to pick up the pieces. But that experience didn't break me. Instead, it made me more determined. I promised myself the next time, I wouldn't fail. I wouldn't let myself get blindsided again. And then I met her, let's call her Jessica. We met at a friend's gathering in Phoenix, of all places. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was still recovering from my divorce, but Jessica had this way about her, this energy that drew me in. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room, make you feel like you were the only one who mattered. She made me forget everything I'd gone through. At first, we took things slow. Our first date was nothing extravagant, just dinner at Rosa's Bistro, this little Italian place I like to go to. But it wasn't the food, it was the conversation. She was sharp, quick-witted, and she didn't back down from anything. I remember thinking, this is it, this is the woman I could build a life with. We both had our baggage, but it felt like together, we could take on anything. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. Every couple has their rough spots. Like the time I lost my job, and we had to survive on her income alone. But we made it through, or so I thought. Looking back now, hindsight shows all the red flags I was too blind to see at the time. Before I get into that, though, let me introduce someone else, my best friend, David. David and I had known each other since college. We both went to Arizona State University, full of big dreams and ambition. He wasn't just a friend, he was like a brother to me. We did everything together, road trips, parties, even worked our first jobs together after graduation. When my first marriage fell apart, David was the one who pulled me through it. He was always there for me, and I trusted him completely. Naturally, he was the first person I introduced Jessica to. The three of us even went on a road trip to Sedona together, no drama, just fun. I never once thought twice about it back then. But now I wonder how much I missed. I thought I had everything under control. Jessica and I settled into a comfortable rhythm, planning for the future, talking about kids, vacations, and even upgrading to a bigger house. We weren't rich, but we were doing well enough. After everything I'd been through, I thought I finally had it all: a stable home, a woman I loved, and a best friend who was like family. But family life has a funny way of blinding you. You get so caught up in the day-to-day grind that you don't notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. We spent our weekends binge-watching TV, planning future trips, and dreaming about how many kids we wanted. I thought that meant everything was perfect. But stability? It's just an illusion when the ground is already shifting beneath your feet. I know what you're probably wondering: when did everything start to go wrong? The truth is, in the beginning, you never feel like something's wrong. The betrayal doesn't come with warning signs. You don't see it because you don't want to see it. With David, I thought we were as close as brothers. If something was wrong, I believed he'd tell me. He'd always had my back, just like I'd had his. Never in a million years did I think my best friend and my wife would betray me. But here I am, telling you this story. It started with little things, details that, looking back now, scream red flags, but at the time, I was too busy being the happy husband to notice. Jessica had always been an open book. We shared everything: texts, stories, laughs. But slowly, that began to change. I still remember the first time I noticed her being glued to her phone. We were always the type of couple who shared funny texts with each other, but suddenly, she started getting secretive. She'd tilt her phone away from me when I walked by or lock it when I sat next to her. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was nothing, right? But when you've been with someone for years, you know when something's off. And then came the late nights. Jessica worked in advertising, so late nights weren't uncommon. But they started becoming more frequent, too frequent. She'd come home smelling like a different perfume than her usual one, her hair and makeup done up like she'd been out somewhere other than the office. I tried asking about her day, but she was always too tired to talk. She'd flash me this empty smile and head straight to bed, leaving me alone with this sinking feeling in my gut. I'll never forget the night I finally lost it. She walked in well after midnight, and there I was, sitting in the dark like some kind of cliché. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, trying to keep calm. She barely glanced at me, rolling her eyes like I was being ridiculous. "I told you, I had a late meeting," she said, kicking off her heels and heading to the bathroom. But this time, I wasn't letting it go. A meeting that ends at midnight? Come on, Jessica, what's really going on? She didn't even turn around. "Work is stressful right now. Can we not do this tonight?" That was her favorite excuse: stress from work. And maybe it was true. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But there was something about the way she said it. She wouldn't look me in the eye. It just didn't sit right. And then there was David. David had been my best friend for years. We'd gone through everything together: college, jobs, breakups, and countless adventures. But suddenly, he started pulling away. No more weekend hangouts, no more grabbing beers after work. He always had some excuse: work, family commitments, whatever. But the worst part was, even when we did see each other, he seemed distracted, on edge, like he was waiting for something to blow up. It wasn't just me who noticed either. Our mutual friends started making little comments about how David seemed distant. I remember one night, after a few drinks, one of the guys leaned over and asked, "What's up with David lately? He's been acting weird." I laughed it off at the time, saying something like, "Yeah, probably just work stress." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. For a while, I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I'd been through a rough first marriage, so maybe I was just reading too much into things. But the signs kept piling up, and they were impossible to ignore. Then one day, Jessica changed the password on her phone. Now, I get it, couples don't have to share everything. But this was new. We'd always been completely open with each other. We trusted one another. Or at least, we used to. Suddenly, I felt like I was living with a stranger. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, I got the same rehearsed lines, "It's just work. I'm tired. You're overthinking it." But I wasn't fine. I felt like I was drowning, like I didn't even know the person I was married to anymore. And then I did something I'm not proud of. I started checking her phone. I'm not one for invading privacy, but I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if there was really something going on. But no matter how many times I checked, I never found anything, no suspicious texts, no shady calls, just the same old work emails and group chats. Still, the more I looked, the more I convinced myself that something was off, that I was missing something. And one night, after another one of those late meetings, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I looked her in the eyes and asked, "Are you cheating on me?" She froze for just a second, a split second, but it was enough. Then she turned and gave me this irritated look. "Seriously? After everything we've been through, you think I'm cheating on you?" Her words stung, but it was the way she said them. It was too perfect, too polished, like she'd been preparing for this moment. I wanted to believe her, God knows I did. I wanted so badly to think I was wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. She was lying. And David, he was lying too. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing my best friend. But instead of blowing up right then and there, I did what anyone desperate for the truth would do, I kept quiet. I watched. I waited. I started putting together the pieces, all while pretending I didn't know a thing. Every time Jessica went out, every time David came up with another excuse, I logged it away in my mind, slowly building a wall between us. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted to be ready. Even though I didn't want to believe it, I was still clinging to a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. But the signs were there, and they were getting harder to ignore. The breaking point came one weekend and we had a family dinner planned. Jessica had always been big on family, and we'd had this dinner with her parents scheduled for weeks. Then, at the last minute, she suddenly had to cancel because of a work emergency. It didn't make sense. Why cancel something so important for an excuse that vague? That was when I knew. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. I called David, thinking maybe we could hang out, blow off some steam. But he didn't pick up. Not once. I left messages, texts, even checked his social media, but nothing. Dead silence. At that moment, I realized I needed real answers. The kind you can't get from just guessing. The next morning, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Greg, and he wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He listened while I laid everything out, Jessica's strange behavior, David's sudden distance, the late nights, the secrets. He didn't ask many questions, just took notes like he'd seen this 1,000 times before. "How long do these kinds of things usually take?" I asked, my voice shaky. Greg didn't even look up. "Depends. Sometimes a few days, sometimes a couple of weeks. But if there's something going on, we'll find it." I clung to the word "if," hoping maybe this was all in my head, that it was just stress or a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. It didn't take long. 3 days later, Greg called. His voice was calm, like he'd given bad news so many times it didn't even faze him anymore. "I think you'll want to see this," he said. We met at a quiet cafe across town, Barrett's Coffee House, nothing fancy, just discreet. Greg handed me a manila envelope, and my hands shook as I took it. I wasn't ready to open it, but I had no choice. Inside were photos, clear, undeniable pictures of Jessica and David together. Not just hanging out as friends, but together. Holding hands at a bar, walking into a hotel, her laughing with him the way she used to laugh with me. I felt sick to my stomach. physically ill. But that wasn't the worst of it. Greg had gone all out. There were text messages between them, screenshots of their conversations, and even a video from a hotel security camera. There they were, arm in arm, disappearing behind a door. I sat there, staring at the evidence, unable to breathe. Even with everything laid out in front of me, I didn't want to believe it. But there it was, Jessica, the woman I had built my life around, and David, the man I trusted more than anyone, had been sneaking around behind my back for months. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the photos and texts, trying to process it all. Greg didn't say much, he didn't have to. He just gave me the space I needed to let it sink in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I asked, "How long?" He shrugged, glancing at his notes. "Best guess. A few months, maybe longer." A few months. They'd been sneaking around behind my back for months. I wanted to scream, to break something, to confront them both right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I quietly thanked Greg, tucked the envelope into my bag, and left the cafe. I drove home in a daze, the anger and hurt boiling inside me, but I knew I had to keep my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was how the two people I trusted most had stabbed me in the back. Jessica, the woman I loved, and David, the man I thought of as a brother. And they thought they'd gotten away with it. But they were wrong. As the hours passed, my thoughts began to shift. Instead of reacting emotionally, I started to form a plan. I wasn't going to blow up or lash out. No, I was going to hit them where it hurt the most. For Jessica, it was our marriage. For David, it was his precious career. David worked at a high-profile company, and image meant everything to him. He was always going on about his spotless reputation, how he was in line for a big promotion. He acted like he had it all together. But I knew where to strike. First, I needed more evidence. Sure, Greg had given me plenty, but I wanted more, something undeniable. I had Greg follow them for another week, collecting more information. It wasn't hard. Jessica and David were reckless, acting like they would never get caught. More dinners, more hotels, even a weekend trip. They weren't even trying to hide it. Once I had everything I needed, I began laying the groundwork. David's company had a strict code of conduct, especially regarding affairs that could tarnish their reputation. If I played my cards right, I could destroy his entire career with just a few well-timed pieces of evidence. I drafted an anonymous email to his HR department, attaching photos, texts, and even a note about how his affair could harm the company's image. I made sure to mention that he was up for a promotion, just to twist the knife a little deeper. But I didn't hit send right away. I waited. I wanted to make them sweat a little longer. Every time Jessica came home late, every time she lied to my face, I smiled to myself. She had no idea what was coming. And David? He hadn't reached out in weeks. I figured he was too busy sleeping with my wife to check in on his best friend. Finally, after weeks of watching them, I sent the email. And you know what? I didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. They deserved every bit of what was coming their way. It didn't take long for things to start falling apart. Revenge isn't something you rush. If you want to do it right, you have to be patient, cold, calculating patience. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the best of me. After everything they had done, I had to make sure it was perfect. I had to hit them where it hurt the most. After sending the email to David's HR, I didn't just sit back and relax. I kept gathering more dirt, making sure my case was airtight. Greg continued tailing them, and with each new piece of evidence, it felt like another nail in their coffin. I knew their every move, every time they met up, every little secret moment. It was almost laughable how careless they had become, like they thought no one would ever notice. They weren't just sneaking around in private anymore. They were going out in public, acting like a carefree couple. I tracked their movements, knew when they met for lunch, where they went for drinks after work, even when they took their so-called business trip together. But the real kicker? Social media. They thought they were being clever, posting vague pictures of sunsets, fancy dinners, and hotels. But to anyone paying attention, it was obvious. David would post a picture from some work event with a glass of wine, and an hour later, Jessica would post the same thing from the same place. They might as well have been waving a neon sign that said, "We're together." I saved everything, screenshots, timestamps, and comments. It was all part of the plan. David's perfect image as the model family man was about to come crashing down, and I was going to be the one to make it happen. You see, David wasn't just any guy at the office. He had ambitions. He was always bragging about his promotion, how much his bosses respected him, how spotless his reputation was. He had built this image of himself as the perfect husband, the devoted father, the guy who always put his family first. And people believed it. But no one knew the real David, no one but me. And that's where I knew I could strike. Right at the heart of his career. But before I dropped the bomb on his job, I needed to lay the groundwork in our social circle. You can't just hit people with a truth like this all at once. It has to seep in, slowly. Like poison. I started small, planting little seeds of doubt with our mutual friends. Nothing obvious, just subtle remarks here and there. "Hey, have you noticed David's been a bit off lately?" Or, "Jessica's been working late a lot recently, haven't seen her around much." I didn't need to say much. People love thinking they're in on a secret. Once I planted those seeds, they did the rest for me. The gossip spread, and soon enough, the rumors found their way back to me. I played my part perfectly, the concerned husband, just trying to hold things together. "Yeah, it's been tough," I'd say, lowering my voice like I was confiding something private. "Jessica's been distant, but we're working through it." The setup was perfect. I wasn't just out to destroy David's career, I wanted to break apart his friendships, his family, everything that mattered to him. David had always been the guy everyone admired, the one who seemed to have it all. By the time I was done, no one would trust him anymore. While the rumors were doing their work in the background, I kept a close eye on David's work situation. HR had received my anonymous email, but they hadn't acted yet. I knew it would take time for them to investigate, but that was fine. I wasn't in a rush, I wanted them to find the cracks themselves. Meanwhile, I kept gathering more dirt, making sure everything was in place. Greg continued following Jessica and David, collecting every new bit of evidence I could use. I had everything I needed, photos, texts, even videos. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One of the most satisfying parts of my plan was talking to David's wife. She had no idea what her perfect husband was really up to. I didn't have to say much, just asked how things were going with David, how their kids were doing. She gushed about how amazing he was, what a wonderful father and husband he had been. It took every ounce of self-control not to laugh in her face. Keeping a straight face while knowing what I knew was harder than I expected. Every now and then, guilt would creep in. After all, David's wife adored him, and their kids, innocent in all of this, didn't deserve to be caught up in their father's mess. But then I would think back to the photos, the texts, the betrayal. The guilt. It vanished pretty quickly. As the weeks went on, the tension between me and David became impossible to ignore. People were starting to pick up on it. Mutual friends would ask why we hadn't been hanging out as much, why things seemed different. I shrugged it off with vague excuses, like, people change, I guess. But I could see the curiosity burning in their eyes. They wanted the full story. And soon enough, they would get it. Finally, the time had come for the real takedown. You see, revenge isn't just about getting back at someone, it's about timing. You need to hit them when it will cause the most damage. That's what I had in mind when I planned the event. This wasn't going to be a quiet confrontation. Jessica and David wouldn't just feel my wrath in private. No, I wanted to expose them in front of everyone they cared about, friends, family, colleagues. It had to be public. I rented out a fancy venue, one of those upscale places you'd use for corporate events or milestone celebrations. It had to look innocent, like just another gathering of friends and family. I sent out the invitations, making sure everyone important would be there. Mutual friends, people from David's office, and a few of his higher-ups, the ones whose opinions mattered most to him. If I was going to ruin him, it had to be in front of the people whose respect he valued. I didn't hold back with Jessica's family, either. Her parents had always been supportive of us, and I knew this would hit them hard. But they needed to know what their daughter had been up to. No one was going to escape seeing what was about to go down. In the days leading up to the event, I practiced my speech over and over. It had to be perfect. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst, I needed to stay calm, collected, like I was simply presenting the facts. Facts that no one could argue with. I had everything prepared, the photos, the videos, the texts, all ready to display on a big screen for everyone to see. I even hired a tech guy to make sure everything went off without a hitch. This wasn't just revenge, it was going to be a public execution. The night of the event arrived, and the atmosphere in the venue was lively. People were laughing, drinking, chatting about their families and jobs, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Jessica was there too, playing the role of the perfect wife, smiling, charming, mingling with everyone like everything in our life was just fine. And David? He was working the room, shaking hands, laughing confidently, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to implode. I stood on the other side of the room, watching them both. It was almost entertaining in a twisted way, seeing how sure they were that they'd gotten away with everything. They had no idea what was coming for them. When the time was right, I made my move. I stepped up to the front of the room, where everyone could see me. The lights dimmed, and the chatter died down as all eyes turned toward me. I tapped the microphone, cleared my throat, and began my speech. Thank you all for being here tonight, I started, my voice steady and controlled. It means a lot to have friends, family, and colleagues gathered together like this. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about trust, about how important it is to know the people closest to you are always there, no matter what. I glanced over at Jessica. She looked confused, glancing around the room nervously. David, standing toward the back, had gone pale. He knew something was up, but he didn't yet know just how bad it was about to get. And tonight, I continued, I'd like to share something personal. Something that's been weighing on me for a while. I nodded to the tech guy, and the screen behind me flickered to life. The first image appeared, Jessica and David, hand in hand, outside a restaurant. There was an audible gasp from the crowd. Jessica's face turned white, and David's confident smile vanished instantly. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is my wife and my best friend, sneaking around behind my back. I didn't stop there. More photos appeared, Jessica and David laughing together, kissing, walking into hotels. Then came the texts, screenshots of their conversations, filled with flirtatious banter, plans to meet up, and even mocking jokes about how clueless I was. The room fell silent, except for the murmurs of shock and disbelief rippling through the crowd. Jessica stumbled over her words, trying to speak. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, her voice trembling. But no one believed her. Her excuses didn't hold up anymore. David didn't even try to defend himself. He just stood there, frozen in place, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. The room quickly erupted in chaos. Friends and family began shouting, demanding answers, asking how Jessica and David could do something so heartless. Some turned to me, offering their support, but I wasn't looking for sympathy. This wasn't about pity, it was about justice. Jessica's parents, sitting in the front row, looked devastated. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and her father just sat there, shaking his head in disbelief. A small part of me felt bad for them, but that sympathy faded quickly. As the accusations and outrage spread through the room, Jessica tried to come up to me, her face twisted in desperation. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Let's talk about this. It's not what you think." I stepped back, shaking my head. "There's nothing to talk about, Jessica. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." David, meanwhile, was standing in the back of the room, speechless. He knew it was over, his career, his friendships, his reputation, everything. The higher-ups from his company were already whispering amongst themselves, distancing themselves from him. His perfect image, the one he had worked so hard to build, was shattered beyond repair. I let them stew in their shame for a while, watching as the weight of their actions fully sank in. By the end of the night, Jessica was a wreck, desperately trying to explain herself to anyone who would listen. But no one cared. David had slunk off to a corner, likely trying to figure out how to salvage whatever was left of his life. As the event wound down, people started leaving, shaking their heads in disbelief. A few friends came up to me, telling me I'd done the right thing, that they were proud of me for standing up for myself. But I didn't feel proud, just empty. At least it was over. The fallout from that night spread like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew what had happened. Jessica and David's names were being whispered in every circle. David's bosses found out about the affair, thanks to the email I sent. His promotion? Gone. In fact, they quietly let him go from the company, not wanting the bad press. His spotless reputation was completely obliterated. As for Jessica, her life unraveled just as quickly. Her family was humiliated, ashamed of what she had done. Our mutual friends, people we had known for years, cut her off completely. Overnight, she became a pariah, the woman who had betrayed her husband with his best friend. I, of course, cut her out of my life entirely. She tried to reach out, calling, texting, even showing up at my door in tears, begging for forgiveness. But I didn't respond. She made her decision, and now she had to live with the consequences. I won't lie, there was a certain satisfaction in watching their lives crumble. It felt like justice had been served. But once the dust settled, I realized that revenge doesn't fill the emptiness. Even though I had exposed them, I was still left standing in the wreckage of my own life. Starting over wasn't easy. The betrayal hit me hard, and for a long time, trusting anyone again felt impossible. I pulled away from people, isolated myself. But eventually, I realized that hiding from the world wasn't going to help. I had to rebuild. Slowly, I started letting new people into my life, people who didn't know the whole story, who didn't see me as the guy whose wife had cheated on him. It took time, but eventually, I began to trust again, even if it was cautious and guarded. I focused on myself for the first time in years. I picked up old hobbies, traveled, and met new people. Sure, there were still moments when the pain resurfaced, when I thought about the life I thought I had, the trust one had once placed in those closest to me. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the broken man they had left behind. I was someone who had fought through the storm and come out stronger on the other side. If I learned anything from this experience, it's how fragile trust can be. The people you think you know, the ones you believe would never hurt you, can destroy you in an instant without a second thought. But I also learned something even more important: you can't control what other people do. You can't make them love you, you can't make them stay loyal, no matter how much you give. The only thing you can control is how you respond when everything falls apart. For the longest time, I blamed myself. I thought I wasn't enough, that I should have seen it coming or done something differently. But in the end, their betrayal wasn't about me. It was about their selfishness, their inability to be honest. Once I realized that, I was able to let go of the guilt, the anger, the pain. The biggest lesson I learned: you have to know your own worth. You can't let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. At the end of the day, the only person who will always have your back is you. And that's enough. So here I am, living life on my own terms. I'm not searching for a new relationship, and honestly, I might not ever look for one again. But I'm okay with that. I've learned how to be content with myself, without needing someone else to complete me. And in the end, that's the best revenge I could have ever asked for.